Welcome to another episode of The Other Side. Today we're going to be having a bit of a change in our format, a debate between the 80s and the 90s, in entertainment value, which was greater. I'm Wesley.
I'm Will. Before we start our debate, I happened to catch Rath's response to you, and you started by keying his car and stealing his glasses.
Guilt is charged.
And then he retaliated on you by jumping you during your video game
I probably had that coming.
Yeah, and then you dressed like Rath and challenged him, and then he cut the promo, which I thought was a little harsh. Now, Rath's been cutting promos on Donald Trump, but now he's turned his eyes towards Wesley.
Yeah, I caught that Geritol-infused rant that he went on. And by the way, when we're talking intelligence, Rath starts with a W, you dumb son of a bitch. He talked about Trump, he took some shots at me. Oh, and by the way, at least my girlfriend isn't inflatable. You ever been with a woman you didn't have to pay for, Rath? But the one thing I didn't hear was an answer. I've challenged you twice.
What?
But you want to come on my show.
What?
The Other Side.
What?
Acting like a big shot.
What?
Acting like you matter.
What?
Looking like buckwheat after he stuck his finger in a light socket.
What?
No answer. Are you scared?
He shoved me down.
He did.
He shoved me down.
I'm scared, Wesley. I'm scared, bro. Because I know if I take you on, you're gonna kill. My wig's falling off, bro. My wig's falling off, bro. The whole point is a match. Anywhere, anytime.
Now we're gonna start our 80s, 90s debate. All right. So since this was your idea, call it in the air.
Heads.
It's a two-headed coin. Tails! The 80s is gonna start.
Alright.
Oh, but you will get to pick the topic first. I think that would be fair for you to pick the topic.
Let's start with music.
Alright, music it is.
You love music. We'll start with music.
In music.
In music, your time starts now.
1980s music, we saw an explosion of the pop industry, huge record sales for Michael Jackson, the Thriller album, which blew all the records of any albums previously sold. We had introduction to artists like Madonna. We had the rise of Prince with Purple Rain, one of the hugest movie soundtracks at that time. Also, movies and music artists really combined, and you had very popular albums like Footloose and Beverly Hills Cops, things like that. We also saw the rise of one of my favorite genres, and that's heavy metal music with Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth, Iron Maiden, spectacular bands. We also had Live Aid, where several artists got together to feed the hungry with one of the largely successful singles, We Are the World. Written by Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie. Also Lionel Richie, a huge artist. We saw the birth of MTV and music videos 24/7, and I loved that, and that's music in 1980s.
Alright.
Are you ready?
Yes, I am ready.
Now we hear the 90s. Why was the 90s music so good?
Well, as far as music in the 90s go, the 90s can boast that they had the popularity of the best-selling artist of all time, and that's Garth Brooks. But beyond that, they had the country music really came into its own with Shania Twain, different artists, Lone Star, the Dixie Chicks coming out. You had the birth of the modern R&B and rap with Snoop Dogg, Tupac, Biggie, TLC, Bone Thugs and Harmony. You had the alternative rock coming over from the West Coast with Nirvana, Nine Inch Nails, Korn, Green Day, Offspring, which were different than the hair metal we had gotten used to. You had Pearl Jam come out of this. You also had Alanis Morissette really be a very, very profound female rock musician. Loved her music. And that was pretty much, music in the 90s.
Whenever it's still a minute.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, you talked about some interesting rap groups. I also think without Run DMC combining with Aerosmith, rap became a lot more popular or mainstream. You had the explosion of gangster rap like NWA and I guess Lil LL Cool J and Ice-T. The country was pretty mainstream in the early 1980s already with Eddie Rabbitt and Juice Newton. Let's see, what else musically? there was lots of different genres of rock. Obviously the hair bands, which kind of got a little bloated at the time. But you also had, you know, rock like Bruce Springsteen, people like that. I just think that music videos were more entertaining to watch. I think that the variety of music you were hearing on the radio at the time, before everything became its own, the pop station, the rock station, so on and so forth, I think it was more interesting to listen to the radio. And albums were more interesting to listen to because you had track 1 through 10 with something worth listening to instead of just a single.
80s, I'll give it to pop. 80s had better pop music. I personally can't stand 90s pop when you got, you know, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Backstreet Boys. I don't really like them. I'll give it to the 80s on pop because it had Michael Jackson. You know, he wins it hands down. As far as the rock music in the 80s was good, but it was all about partying and having a good time, where rock music in the 90s was about, same with, you know, gangster rap was born in the 80s, but it hit stride in the 90s, and all that was talking about is this is kind of a messed up world we live in, and it's not just sex, drugs, and rock and roll all the time, that, you know, people are dying, you know, young kids are getting shot in the street, people commit suicide, you know, we're going to talk about real shit, you know, not just having a good time, because that's not life. And yeah, country music was big in the 80s, but it really blew up in the 90s. You had so many great country songs and country musicians that came out, you know, and then just the evolution of rock, it was, you know, influenced by some things that might have happened in the 80s, but it went on its own thing.
Video games.
Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo. I don't even know if I need to continue, but I'll go PlayStation. Technology just blew up in the 90s and gave us the video games that just we never thought would exist. You had your Final Fantasy franchise, you know, Legend of Zelda taking it to a higher with Link to the Past. You had Mario, you had the N64 coming out with Mario in, you know, a three-dimensional world that just blew people's minds. Final Fantasy 3, which is for the RPG buffs is the favorite. Final Fantasy VII for the mainstream audience was just huge, with the PlayStation giving us graphics and a huge world to explore that we had never seen before. Not to mention Doom, which gave us the first-person shooter. Wolfenstein helped, but let's be honest, Doom, you know, really took off. Video games in the 90s were just kick-ass from beginning to end, with even a Wrath lookalike in Sonic the Hedgehog.
You just couldn't leave Wrath alone.
No, I
Very
couldn't.
Good. Video games in the 80s. I think console games took us out of the arcades and we became more isolated. I think it was more fun going to the arcades, even though you had to stand in line sometimes to play some of your favorites. But you had Centipede, Ms. Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Q*bert, all sorts of things that we saw in Pixels that we really enjoyed, the good parts. You also did see like the birth of Mario in the original Nintendo. And Sega did make it before, you know, it hit the 90s. I think games like Contra and Super Mario Brothers and Zelda, those were huge games. Again, you also had the explosion in the arcades with first-person shooters, and you had games that you could like ride with motorcycles, Cruisin' USA. I really think that there was a lot of different variety in the video games, and even though they were lacking some of the technology, they did give birth to many of those franchises that would see their success in the 1990s. That's 80s and video games.
It took under a minute because there was less to talk about. Okay, 80s, yes, it gave us the video game industry that we had in the 90s, but it also gave us the video game crash. From just the market becoming overblown and overstuffed, because anybody could make an Atari game. If you could make a video game, you could literally make a game and sell it for the Atari system, which is how we got Atari porn. Check that out on Angry Video Game Nerd. But anyway, 80s gave us some classic characters, 90s just took it with technology, and, you know, you can't help it. The technology was better, but they also gave us better games. You had games of stories, Resident Evil, Silent Hill. You know, you could take it. Everything was taken to the next level in the 90s, both technology and writing-wise. So many new franchises that are still going strong today were born. And some of the, I mean, arguably one of the best games of all time in Super Mario World was released for the Super Nintendo. And, I mean, that game, I can still play it to this day and not get bored.
1980s, maybe I did keep it a little too simple, but we're in the 1990s. They did Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, N64. In the early 80s, you still had Atari, Atari 5200, Atari 7800, Intellivision, ColecoVision. There was many different companies that were developing game systems, and there were several different variety of games for each one of those game systems. And sometimes you still like to go to the arcades to challenge high scores, so on and so forth. And again, I go back to some of those franchises that were built in the 1980s carried over into the 90s, and that was successful because some of the biggest games that were released in the 1990s came from Super Mario, Zelda, Contra, and games that were created then. So I really enjoyed playing the 80s games, even though we had a game like E.T., which again, that as not unentertaining as it was, it still became one of the biggest stories and it is E.T., all the games, they sucked, they buried it in the desert, and that's true. So, you even have, we had the best of, and we had the worst of in the 1980s. 80s and video games. 80s and television. I will start right off the bat with, I think, more good TV came out in the 80s and less channels than the 90s produced in all their many, many channels. You could flip through TV in the 90s and you weren't really going to find anything but a few hot spots. I think that the whole world was curious, well, maybe not the whole world, but most of the United States was very sitting on the edge of their seats over one show, and that was Who Shot JR in Dallas. We had wonderful comedy specials or comedy shows like Different Strokes, Facts of Life, Growing Pains, Golden Girls, Cheers, Alf, and so on and so forth. The nighttime dramas like Dallas, Dynasty, Hill Street Blues. We had action series like A-Team, Miami Vice, Incredible Hulk. We had TV specials that you could see like V, and probably tons more that I couldn't remember off the top of my head. But it was an event to look forward to. We also saw the birth of Fox and the birth of The Simpsons in the 1980s. We had 21 Jump Street with Johnny Depp. I think there was just a huge variety, and it was TV that wasn't worth, or wasn't, you didn't want to miss it. TV you shouldn't miss. Are you ready?
Yes. The 1990s gave us television shows that were unlike anything you could see in the 80s. For starters, you had The X-Files, one of the most popular shows of all time. You had Star Trek, The Next Generation. They did something that no one thought you could do. They took Star Trek, a beloved show from the past, and they made it interesting, made it relevant, spawned movies from it. You had The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. You had Xena the Warrior Princess, which might seem laughable, but I thought it was great to see a female action hero in primetime television. You had Boy Meets World. You had Seinfeld, arguably one of the greatest sitcoms of all time, followed by Frasier. You had the birth of South Park. You had Friends, Twin Peaks, King of the Hill, Ren and Stimpy, a great children's cartoon, Rocko's Modern Life, another one that was just so ahead of its time. You had the launch of Futurama, you had the Drew Carey Show, you had the Monday Night War in wrestling, which was must-see TV for even non-wrestling fans, and you want to talk miniseries, you had The Stand and It by Stephen King, not to mention several others. You had Sex and the City. 90s television was hands down better.
And how in the world could I leave out Saturday morning cartoons? Something that was worth looking forward to on a Saturday. Plus the cartoons in the 80s gave you a message like G.I. Joe, now you know type things. You had He-Man. Everybody was trying to give a positive message towards the youth. Star Trek The Next Generation actually was birthed in the 1980s, but it definitely hit its stride in the 90s. And as for wrestling, we also did have Saturday Night Main Event, which was happening on a primetime channel like NBC instead of USA, which lots of people didn't get unless you had your basic cable. We did see the explosion of HBO in 1980s, where a lot of movies started steering towards them. Also the birth of Showtime, Cinemax, and the Movie Channel. I think TV-wise, like I said in the beginning, there were less channels to pick from, but the shows that were on there were worth seeing, and I'll leave it at that.
They had to do the more you know messages because of the FCC, because they were doing 30-minute commercials. They were legally obligated. If they did that, the more you know message at the end of their commercial, then they could say our program is educational, when really it wasn't. That's why those existed. The Saturday morning cartoons, yes, hands down in the 80s, were much better than what we got. But as far as content and story, we got better in the cartoons in the 90s with King of the Hill, actually telling a story through 30 minutes than just Bugs Bunny shooting Daffy Duck in the face or something like that, or Speedy Gonzales running around. There was actually a plot to the cartoons. Hey Arnold, Rugrats. There was actually something going on each episode, a problem that had to be resolved. And really in the 80s, all you had that, other than your action cartoons, was The Simpsons had a great plot, and there were others that had good plots, but that was just something you saw. Now I will say, in the 80s, animation was much better, but the 90s also gave us the animated classic Spawn, and if you haven't seen it, check it out.
Now we will move on into movies.
Yes, into movies. Arguably this one is close. But in the movies, we get, I'm just going to run down the list, Forrest Gump, Titanic, Jurassic Park, Independence Day, The Lion King, Sixth Sense, Men in Black, Terminator 2, Ghost, Aladdin, Saving Private Ryan, Home Alone, which is the highest grossing comedy of all time, by the way. The Matrix, Philadelphia, Austin Powers, Dances with Wolves, Toy Story, Mrs. Doubtfire, The Rise of Jim Carrey, Pretty Woman, and The Mighty, which I looked long and hard to find a counter to movies like classics like Stand By Me that really showed the importance of friendship, and I found The Mighty, released in 1998. If you haven't seen it, you check it out, but have a box of Kleenex with you. Some of the highest grossing movies came out in the 90s. The franchises that are still running strong today, such as Jurassic Park, came out in the 90s. And Dances with Wolves, we all know, was the inspiration for Avatar. Austin Powers was an excellent comedy, and we got Tom Hanks in 2 Academy Award-winning roles. Your time begins now.
I can run off a bunch of movies, but to me that doesn't really mean a heck of a lot. I think E.T., being one of the most highest grossing movies up until the 90s, I think was something to talk about. I think some of the technology that was created in the 1980s, like Abyss and, the computer technology. We saw the rise in superhero movies with Superman 2 and Batman. Stephen King, the horror genre, like Freddy Krueger and Jason continuing series and Hellraiser. I think the horror movies were more entertaining to watch in the 80s. Disney really hit its stride with Little Mermaid, which carried on to the 90s. We also had great war movie like Platoon and dramas like Rain Man and funny things like Bill and Ted and The Breakfast Club, which The Breakfast Club is still very iconic. We had, of course, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, Star Trek 2, 3, 4, and I think 5 was in there. So there was a lot of variety. I think a lot of things were created into the 80s that the 90s got to benefit from, and I think the subject matter in the 80s was powerful.
Yes, rebuttal to that. Some of the 80s, what the movies are about, were powerful, but so was the discussion of AIDS in movies in the 1990s. You saw the discussion of mental handicap, which had kind of been, touched on in Rain Man, but furthered not so much in Forrest Gump, but in the movie I Am Sam, starring Sean Penn. You had a lot of technology come out in the 80s, but then you had Jurassic Park in the 90s, which just was like the CGI child finally being born. And that with a movie with special effects that are so good, they still stand up today and look better than, movies that came out later, like Jurassic Park 3. I personally would like to see the dinosaurs in the first one. I just think overall you had better acting, you had better scripts, you had bigger budgets, you had bigger movies. The 90s movies were just much better, not to mention Titanic, one of the highest grossing movies of all time, but talking highest grossing is pointless because it keeps going up every.
I would like to look, we hear a lot about CGI, but some of us still like to look at movies like The Empire Strikes Back and the work that went into building those models and some of the costumes that were made instead of everything just being CGI. CGI is great, but sometimes it gets overdone. We also saw, Robin Williams and Whoopi Goldberg, movies like The Color Purple that were they're huge comedies. Again, I go to the horror genre that was, to me, more entertaining. We also had TV shows that, even though you said they were commercials, they transferred into cartoon movies. Alvin and the Chipmunks, Transformers. He-Man got a movie. I wouldn't say it was all great, but He-Man got a movie. And I think some of the slang and the dress that the outfits that we had. Madonna was in a movie. Purple Rain, a movie that I love. I think there was just a wonderful integration of the MTV genre TV mixing with movies and movie soundtracks going to music. It was just a wonderful time for entertainment in movies.
Okay.
I think one of our next great debates will be Game of Thrones. This is the other side, and we're out.